And my name's Rich Powell. I have the privilege of leading the Clean Energy Buyers Association. As Margaret said, we represent the very largest corporate energy purchasers in the country, and everyone is united with the common goal of low-cost, reliable, carbon emissions-free electricity systems globally. Here in the United States, we spend a tremendous amount of time thinking about our grid and keeping that grid affordable and reliable, especially as we go through this period of incredible economic growth and opportunity across our membership. We obviously have a few members that are driving just an absolutely enormous amount of growth by putting in new high-tech infrastructure around the country, but we also represent advanced manufacturers of all kinds, large retailers, large petrochemical facilities. If you buy a lot of electricity, you're probably on the board of SEBA. And so I am delighted to be here in conversation about the prospects for federal permitting reform with two of the great leaders on this topic in the United States Senate. At SEBA, we think a couple things very quickly about this. We think that a deal is there that could cover both improvements to our permitting systems, faster adjudication, and importantly, more transmission, an enormous amount of additional transmission in the system. And we think that time is of the essence for this deal. If we think back to the last time we passed real deal energy policy in this country, the Energy Act, real deal bipartisan energy policy in this country, the Energy Act of 2020, that was on the floor of the United States Senate in March of the second year of that Congress, and it had already seen House passage in the previous year. So I think that we have a matter of weeks, not months, to get really serious about this if we're going to advance it. So now that I've led the witnesses here, we'll see what we think about the prospects for this. I'm told we have relatively limited time, so I'm going to skip the glowing introductions on this. I think, as Margaret said, both of you, or everyone here knows that these two amazing leaders have been really driving this conversation. Senator Hickenlooper, obviously, with your amazing work on both transmission and on the co-location issue, and Senator from the greatest state, with no disrespect to Colorado, as a fellow Pennsylvanian, I have to say, the great state of Pennsylvania has been such a leader on driving this opportunity of massive economic expansion and opportunity. For example, with your incredibly successful summit, bringing together the energy producers and the data center operators and the AI infrastructure in Pennsylvania. So why don't we start with transmission? Why don't we start with transmission? And maybe, Senator Hickenlooper, I'll start with you. Too often, I think, this topic has become one that is linked up in just one part of the conversation about additional energy. And so it's become very much a conversation about how do we onboard just some sources of carbon-free electricity. So how do we onboard just more wind and solar into our system? And it's been very tied to that. And I wonder what you think about transmission and where the benefits of transmission can flow generally.
So thank you, Rich, and thanks for doing this. And the bipartisan policy group is, the gold mark, the gold standard in trying to figure out how to get things done here. And Senator McCormick is a model, has a even more varied history in life than I do, and therefore is also a great collaborator in getting things done. I want to depoliticize a lot of this energy discussion, right? There's not Democratic energy or Republican energy. There's electrons are not affiliated, to my knowledge. We need a lot more energy. There can be no arguing that fact, and we need to do a lot of things at once. And as you point out, we can't kind of just, kind of have a timeline that does one step at a time, and we kind of look at, and maybe we'll get a rough draft done by November and kind of hope we can massage it through. That's not going to work. And if you look at the increasing demand, this is an order of magnitude more demand than what we're used to, and it's coming like a 18-wheeler down the highway right at us, and we've got to move. We need transmission. Without question, we have to dramatically expand our transmission, but we also have to make sure that, I'm a quick one to say that when this country makes a commitment, signs a contract with an energy producer of any kind, whether it's, oil and gas or whether it's wind or whether it's solar, we should honor those contracts so that we know what's coming. And every business relies on that level of trust, and we've got to make sure we do that. But again, even as we're making sure we get all those contracts fulfilled, we got a lot of work to do.
Senator McCormick, thoughts on transmission, and also any thoughts on that the point around permitting certainty, energy certainty for energy projects?
Yeah. Well, first, great to be with you. Thanks, Rich. And Senator Hickenlooper and I are not only good colleagues but good friends. So, and this kind of conversation, I think, is the spirit of what needs to happen in general here. But if you'll just permit me, I want to step back for a minute and talk about the moment we're in, because the moment we're in has a lot to do with whether we're going to get permitting reform. And the moment we're in, to be bold, I think, is to say it's the most consequential moment in probably the history of our country. It's like the Industrial Revolution, but on steroids. If you want to be extreme, you might say it's perhaps the most consequential moment in the history of humankind. And by that, I mean what's happening with AI, what's happening with the technology and the speed with which you're seeing that changes is having huge consequences for the way our society works, the way productivity works, the way national security and the risk of national security. It's the most fundamental change in our lifetimes for sure. And you can't say AI and the AI revolution without saying energy and the energy revolution. Those two things go hand in hand. So they're inextricably linked. And if you believe that this is happening, whether we like it or not, and that we have to guide it, lead it, channel it to make sure it brings the most benefit to America, to our security, to lifting all boats and having whatever benefits there are spread across the population, but also having any risk mitigated. If you believe that, then there has to be a national strategy for dealing with it. And that's going to be highly dependent on energy. In fact, that's the area where we perhaps lag the most in the AI revolution, is the energy necessary to produce it. So if you frame the problem like that, then our energy production capability needs to triple. And we're still behind China in terms of its capacity. And that needs to be an all of the above energy strategy that's embracing all forms of energy: nuclear, natural gas, solar, wind, creates baseload energy. And that's going to require enormous transmission capability to keep up with that energy production. And if you think about it in that way, then the long pole in the tent, one of the things that stands in the way most of being able to lead that revolution, is the speed with which we can create that capacity and that transmission capability. And that's why permitting reform is a national imperative. It also has enormous economic benefits, because there's $1 trillion of capital that's held up that can't be invested because of the permitting reform. But it's the most important thing, or certainly one of the most important things we could do for this existential moment. And I'm not sure we're going to be able to accomplish it as much as, but I want to frame it like that because the stakes of not getting it right are such a big deal. And I agree, I don't know if it's weeks, but this Congress, we need to take the momentum of the moment, the bipartisan support that we have. And I'm not sure I don't think there's much Senator Hickenlooper would disagree with on what I said. We've done versions of this before. And so finding the path is going to require a level of urgency that I'm not sure we have, but it's important.
Well, just to build on that, so this is, and I keep track, this is the third Congress in a row. We are attempting this. So third time was a charm, I think. But so, the basic terms of that grand bargain, sort of that was initiated 2 Congresses ago, was the idea that we would have broad federal permitting reform, how this stuff's administered, how it's adjudicated, now probably adding into that this energy certainty requirement, and significant transmission reform as well, kind of as a broad package. Do we think this Congress could be different? What could be different this time around that we could maybe get the deal across the finish line? Obviously, we've got this massive national imperative that you just mentioned. Do we think that's enough?
I've always, I spent most of my professional life as a barkeeper, running a bunch of bars. So I look at
that right there is the understatement of the century, right there. That is humble.
I look at this as a real case of focus, and I mean that by we have, and the Senator talked about a moment. Business and politics both demand the alignment of self-interest. And we are at that unique moment where if you're an environmentalist and you're really concerned and full of anxiety about climate change and what can we do, and we've got to go faster, or you're someone who's really worried about AI and all the other needs of business, of energy that we need, and how do we get them fast enough, that alignment of those two self-interests overlapping is there. And in my experience, again, often across a bar top, but what gets you off, keeps you from maintaining that alignment is when you lose your focus. You start trying to put this issue in or this issue in. So I think part of our job is we got to go out there and make sure that we keep our fellow senators in both parties with a just religious focus on getting this done. And I think we got to get started in a few weeks. To get it done in this Congress, you've got to start that journey sooner.
I won't add to that. I mean, I think we see it very much the same way.
When
But I've been to bars.
Senator McCormick, maybe come back to you. I think we just discussed the broad terms of what that package might look like, but clearly this might well be something that's packaged with a broader set of priorities, maybe a surface transportation bill, for example. You've also been a real champion for additional federal authorities that can speed up heavy investments in this space, federal loan tools and other ways to advance these technologies, both on the infrastructure side and on the energy development side, and that's obviously can be across the whole range of energy producing technologies. What else do you think might flesh out and fill in a package like that?
If you step back and think about, I'm not saying this is necessarily the legislative package, but if you step back and say strategically, what do you need to win? What do you need to get the acceleration in that moment that we're talking about? You need permitting reform that's going to accelerate the capacity to allocate capital. It's going to give confidence. I agree with the senator. If you're an investor, I was an investor for years, certainty is everything. So if you think that if there's a new president when the next president comes in, that if we have executive orders that haven't been built into law, and that if you're a natural gas investor, that you're at risk, or if you're a wind investor, you're at risk, that's just not tolerable. If you're an investor, you can't have that kind of regulatory uncertainty. So we need legislation as a stepping stone on the way to certainty that will draw in this enormous capital. That's one fundamental thing to win the revolution. The second thing we need is, I think, all the support and stimulation for the acceleration of technology development, whether it's nuclear technology, whether it's solar, whether it's natural gas. And that'll happen in the private sector largely, if they're promising, but basic research. Some of the basic research is a role government should play. So I'm a big supporter, I think the governor, or the senator is too, he's been both governor and senator, of NSF funding, of NIH funding, of all these basic research funding that's going to create some of the basic technology that's necessary. And we need to accelerate that because the moment requires it. And then the third thing is a talent point. To win this revolution, we have to have the talent. And in particular, this is taking us back to people who build things, whether it's transmission capability or whether it's production capability, people that are welders and electricians and pipe fitters and steam fitters. These jobs are in huge demand in Pennsylvania. We had this summit, which you mentioned, $92 billion of capital was committed. There's $50 billion of energy infrastructure and $40 billion of data centers. I mean, there's not enough skilled labor to meet that demand. So to meet the moment, I think we need real progress in all three of those things. Obviously, the permitting piece, I think, could go a lot of different ways. I think possibly tying it into the national security imperative associated with AI is a really important way to elevate it and accelerate it, but there's lots of different ways that could happen.
I just want to express huge appreciation for that sentiment about the robust role of the federal government in bringing new technologies onto the market. At CBO, we've been very, very involved in creating a great big corporate demand signal, now the largest signal in North America for pulling these technologies into the market. That sort of started with wind, and then it became solar, and then it became batteries, and now it's nuclear and gas with CCS and geothermal and advanced hydropower. Much of that hydropower, I think, announced at your summit, actually.
Yeah.
And so, but all that's done in partnership with the U.S. federal government. Every one of those technologies had enormous support coming up and out, and often these things we're doing with direct cost share. So hugely appreciate that sentiment. Certainty. So the new thing that's been added to the pile of this grand bargain this year is the idea of energy certainty. So how do we make sure, to your earlier point, that a project that has either already received a permit and is under construction, or that is at a very late stage of permitting, doesn't have that unduly slowed down or taken away? And I wonder both of your thoughts about, how do you think we could craft something like this that, that frankly takes back some of Congress's power in this and takes, frankly, away some of the administration's power to make these calls so that developers have more certainty, so that capital has more certainty, so you don't have multi-year lags and see enormous increases in the cost of capital projects. Do we think that that concept is strong enough now to be added to the package? Because that's the new piece. That's newly introduced this Congress.
You're looking at me, so I think that we have to rectify issues where we've interrupted that process of approval and then allowing it to complete. I think that's very important for private sector and industry. It's important politically. I think it's important for the government itself to have that certainty. We have the alignment of self-interest. We recognize we've got to make sure there's transparency, the public is aware of everything. We're going to protect the public. They get a voice in terms of what's going to happen in their community. We're going to do all that stuff, but that only works if there's trust. And the only way you get trust is providing some level of certainty. So the administration's got to commit to it. The Congress, the Senate, I think, is willing to commit to it. We just have to do it. We know it's there. We just have to do it.
Yeah, I just go back to the point I made earlier. I used to be an investor, and you're trying to create risk-adjusted returns, maximize risk-adjusted returns. So the more risk you have to build into the equation, that brings that risk-adjusted return down, and so you're not going to allocate capital. It's really that simple. I think we have this incredible moment where a lot of these international engagements and negotiations have yielded huge commitments of capital from Japan, from South Korea, from India, and other places, but we have to solidify that certainty for them to make that capital happen. Now, just to be clear on what I was saying before, I think the government can play a role in three things. I think that basic research is hugely important to next generation technology. I think the government should play a role. I've consistently been against subsidizing any source of energy, fossil or not fossil, because I think it distorts the market. Ultimately, if the capability is there, investors will allocate capital. But the thing we should do as government is give them certainty that if they allocate capital, we're the deepest capital markets in the world. If they know they can allocate capital here and they'll have certainty of a regulatory regime, it's going to draw so much capital at a time where we need it to meet the moment. And that's why permitting reform, as you say, three things we could do for national security, permitting reform is in the top three. That's amazing, but that's where it is. It's that important.
Just want to share our excitement, in particular of the announcements from Secretary Lutnick and Secretary Wright, Department of Commerce and the Department of Energy, about this potential massive resource opportunity, this massive build opportunity for technologies like new nuclear on federal land. Could be a game changer in terms of bringing down the cost of those technologies. Okay, we're moving into the lightning round phase now. So I have a final rapid response question for each of you. Can Congress pass a bipartisan permitting reform bill this year? Hopefully I haven't led the witnesses too much on this one. Can Congress do it? Can you do it?
You want me to go first? Of course we can do it, right? I mean, there are lots of obstacles. I think that Congress is beginning and has perhaps finally recognized that this is an imperative. This is a moment, as Senator McCormick says, and we don't have a choice. I mean, we'll do it because we have to do it.
Yeah, and I think the fact that permitting reform was voted out of the House is a huge, important data point. I think the fact that in the last Congress, I wasn't here, but we were very close to permitting reform. I think the politics of this have changed, where people on both sides are saying this is important, and even some of the resistance on both sides to the other's point of view have been softened. So yeah, I do, and I know the leadership of the two committees, particularly the EPW committee, Senator Capito she's leading the charge, and I've talked to folks on both sides and in the White House, and I think people realize this is crucial. So not only can we do it, I think we must, and I'm hopeful we will.
Amen. Can you all join me in a round of applause and appreciation for these two outstanding leaders? Thank you so much.